The night was unnervingly quiet when Sheila Carter sat alone by the window of her modest Los Angeles apartment, her reflection blurred in the glass by the glow of the streetlights. The city outside was alive with noise and movement, but within these walls, there was only silence, a silence heavy with the weight of a woman's conscience. For the first time in years, Sheila felt something that terrified her more than any enemy she had faced, more than any prison cell or public condemnation. She felt doubt. The news about Will Spencer had struck her in a way she didn't expect. The boy, so young, so full of promise, now caught in a spiral of humiliation and pain because of the mess left behind by Luna Nozawa. Sheila knew all too well what manipulation looked like. She had invented it, refined it, and used it as both shield and sword throughout her life. But this time, watching from the outside, she recognized something different. Will wasn't a pawn who had chosen the wrong move. He was collateral damage in a game that had spiraled out of control, a game that once might have amused her, now only mirrored the ruins she had made of her own life. For weeks she had pretended indifference, scoffing at the media circus surrounding Bill Spencer's guilt, Luna's downfall, and Katie's quiet desperation to protect her son. But deep down, Sheila couldn't look away. Will's face, pale, stunned, almost broken, haunted her. It reminded her of the faces she had seen in her own past, of the children she had hurt, the families she had torn apart, the people she had turned into versions of herself without even realizing it. And yet, even as that guilt stirred, another voice rose to meet it, the darker, sharper voice she had always trusted. "Don't be foolish," it hissed. "They will never forgive you. They will never see you as anything but the monster you are." That voice was right, of course. The world of the Forresters, the Logans, and the Spencers was one that would never allow her redemption. They thrived on judgment, on dividing themselves into saints and sinners. Brooke, Katie, Bill, they had built entire lives upon the illusion of moral superiority. Sheila had been their convenient demon, their cautionary tale. Every time they stumbled, they pointed to her as proof that evil existed outside themselves. And yet she knew better. She had seen the cracks in their halos. Brooke's lies. Bill's manipulation. Katie's jealousy disguised as virtue. They weren't so different. They simply hid their sins behind better lighting. Still, the thought of Will wouldn't leave her. He was innocent. That word, innocent, felt foreign on her tongue, almost archaic. Once, long ago, she had believed in innocence too, before life taught her that survival demanded cruelty. But now, as she sat in the dim light of her apartment, she wondered if perhaps cruelty had taken too much. That night, she dreamed of him, Will, standing on a beach, his eyes reflecting the ocean, waves crashing behind him like a warning. He was calling for someone, his voice distant, and when Sheila tried to reach him, her feet sank into the sand as though the earth itself rejected her. When she awoke, her face was wet with tears she hadn't realized she was capable of shedding. By morning, the decision had begun to take shape, not a full decision yet, but the outline of one. She had two paths ahead of her, both familiar in their danger. One would lead her back to power, to the ruthless woman who had survived every betrayal by striking first. The other would lead her toward something unknown, a fragile, trembling version of herself she had never dared to be. If she chose the dark path, it would be easy. She still had connections, doctors who owed her favors, lawyers whose careers she had rescued with blackmail and bribes. One call, one whispered threat, and she could control the narrative. Will's life, Luna's unborn child, Katie's stability, all of it could become her leverage. She could plant evidence, manipulate paternity results, stir enough scandal to destroy the Spencer-Logan alliance once and for all. It would be poetic justice, in a way. Bill's empire collapsing under the weight of his own hypocrisy. Katie watching helplessly as the son she tried to protect became a pawn in Sheila's revenge. Yes, it would be easy, exhilarating even. The monster within her longed for that satisfaction, for the thrill of watching powerful people crumble before her. But then there was the other choice, the one that terrified her. To protect Will. To walk into the line of fire not as predator, but as shield. To prove, not to the world, but to herself, that she could choose something other than destruction. That perhaps redemption wasn't a gift others gave her, but something she could take back for herself. The thought made her nauseous. To protect Will meant betraying everything that had kept her alive. It meant turning against her allies, the shadow network of enablers and conspirators who still whispered her name in secret admiration. It meant exposing the doctors who had falsified reports for her, the lawyers who had buried her crimes, even Deacon, who, despite everything, had stood by her in moments when no one else would. She could imagine his face if she turned herself in. Shock, betrayal, perhaps pity, the one emotion she despised most. Still, the image of Will persisted. He didn't deserve to be broken by her world. He wasn't her enemy. And though she would never say it aloud, he reminded her of the son she had lost, the one who might have loved her if she hadn't destroyed every chance she'd been given. Sheila spent the next few days pacing the narrow confines of her apartment, each hour bringing new clarity and new torment. She read every article about the Spencer family's turmoil, dissecting each line with the precision of a surgeon. She noted how the media spun the story, how Luna was cast as a manipulator, how Bill was painted as a man struggling with guilt, how Katie was portrayed as the grieving mother desperate to restore stability. But nowhere in those stories was Will's voice. No one asked what he felt, what he feared. He had become invisible in his own tragedy. That realization made something in her snap. For once, she didn't want to use someone's pain. She wanted to stop it. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Through one of her old contacts, she learned that Luna's legal team was attempting to reopen negotiations regarding custody rights and medical decisions for the unborn child. The situation was delicate. The paternity test hadn't yet been made public, and whispers circulated that Will might be the father. If true, his future was hanging by a thread. The child, too, could become a weapon. Sheila knew how easily such stories could spiral. She made a call that night to a man named Dr. Norris, a psychiatrist who once fabricated testimony for her during one of her many trials. "I need your help," she said, her voice calm but deadly. Norris hesitated, asking if this was one of those situations. Sheila smiled thinly. "It's something bigger," she replied. "This time, I'm saving someone." Her plan was simple at first. Gather information, find out who was manipulating Luna behind the scenes, and cut the strings before anyone noticed. But plans born from guilt have a way of turning into chaos. The deeper Sheila dug, the more she realized that Luna wasn't acting alone. Someone, a silent investor with ties to the hospital's board, was feeding her money and legal resources. And when Sheila traced that trail, the name she found at the end chilled her. Richard Kane, an attorney notorious for representing powerful men who preferred their secrets buried. He had once worked for Bill Spencer. That revelation hit her like a thunderbolt. The same man who had once cleaned up Bill's messes was now orchestrating one that might destroy his son. Whether it was vengeance, opportunism, or something darker, Sheila didn't care. What mattered was that Will was in danger. Not from Luna, not from Katie, but from the machinery of power itself. Sheila arranged a meeting with Kane under the pretense of a financial proposition. When he arrived at the dimly lit bar where she waited, she greeted him with the charm of a serpent. "You always did enjoy playing both sides," she said. "But you're about to lose the game." Kane smirked, thinking she was bluffing. But when she slid a flash drive across the table, containing evidence of his past dealings with forged hospital records, his smile faded. "You'll drop the case," Sheila whispered. "You'll make sure Luna disappears quietly. Or the next person who sees these files will be the district attorney." It was a classic Sheila move, ruthless, calculated, and undeniably effective. Yet as she watched Kane leave, something inside her felt hollow. For once, victory didn't taste like triumph. It tasted like ashes. Later that night, she sat in her car outside Katie's house, the engine idling as she stared at the warm glow of the living room lights. She imagined Will inside, perhaps reading, perhaps trying to forget everything that had happened. She imagined Katie pacing, worrying. And she realized she could end this. She could walk up to that door, tell them everything she knew, hand over the evidence, and let justice take its course. Her hand reached for the car door, then froze. The monster in her whispered again. "You think they'll thank you? You think they'll forgive you?" It laughed softly in her ear. "They'll call the police before you finish your confession." Sheila closed her eyes, her breath shallow. Maybe that was true. Maybe they'd never forgive her. But forgiveness wasn't the point anymore. The point was will. The next morning, she made her move. She sent the evidence anonymously to Katie Spencer, along with a brief note. "Protect your son. Don't trust the ones who pretend to help." Then, without waiting for a response, she went to the police station. Her heart pounded as she walked through the doors, every instinct screaming for her to turn back. She was Sheila Carter. She didn't surrender. But she wasn't surrendering this time. She was taking control, in the only way left to her. When she confessed to her own part in the manipulation, the extortion, the falsified records, the threats, the officers stared in disbelief. The headlines the next day were brutal. Sheila Carter turns herself in, claims to protect Spencer Eyre. The world laughed. The foresters called it another stunt. Brooks sneered that Sheila was playing the martyr. Bill didn't know what to believe. But Katie did. When she opened the envelope and saw the files, the proof of Kane's corruption, the medical manipulation, she realized that the woman she hated most had just saved her son. In the days that followed, chaos reigned. The police launched a full investigation, which exposed a tangled web of corruption stretching through the medical and legal systems. Kane was arrested. Luna vanished from the public eye. Bill, for once, was speechless. He visited Sheila in custody, standing on the other side of the glass partition, searching her face for motive. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you do this?" Sheila didn't answer. She only smiled faintly and said, "Because someone had to." For the first time in her life, Sheila Carter's name wasn't followed by screams of outrage, but by confusion, by disbelief, by a flicker of reluctant respect. She had not redeemed herself, not fully, but she had changed the rhythm of her story. Still, redemption is never pure. The legal dominoes she had set in motion began to fall in unpredictable ways. Her confession reopened old cases, implicating people she hadn't meant to expose. Deacon found himself under investigation for past associations. Taylor's professional integrity was questioned. Even Katie faced scrutiny for the confidentiality breach when she shared Sheila's evidence with Bill. In trying to save one boy, Sheila had once again plunged an entire city into chaos. As she sat in her cell weeks later, the noise of the outside world muffled by cold concrete, Sheila felt something strange: peace. Not happiness, not absolution, but a quiet acceptance that perhaps this was her destiny. To be both destroyer and savior. To carry the burden of her sins not as punishment, but as proof that she had finally, in her own fractured way, done something right. And somewhere beyond the prison walls, Will stood on the same beach from her dreams, the wind whipping through his hair as the tide rolled in. He didn't know that Sheila had saved him. He might never know. But he felt lighter somehow, as if the weight he'd been carrying had been lifted by unseen hands. Perhaps that was enough. Because for the first time in her long, tragic life, Sheila Carter had chosen love over power, and though the world would never forgive her, the universe, in its cruel, poetic way, finally might. The afternoon sun hung low over Los Angeles, casting long golden shadows across the city as Il Giardino filled with the gentle murmur of lunchtime conversation. The scent of basil and grilled garlic drifted through the air, mingling with the hum of quiet laughter and clinking glasses. It was a beautiful day, almost too beautiful for the kind of turmoil that weighed heavily on Bill Spencer's heart. He sat alone at a corner table, the faint reflection of sunlight glinting off his untouched glass of scotch. To any observer, he looked powerful, controlled, the embodiment of wealth and confidence. But behind his calm exterior, Bill was suffocating under the weight of guilt. He had made a series of choices that now gnawed at him with merciless precision. The name Luna Nozawa echoed in his thoughts like a haunting refrain. What began as an attempt at compassion had become a spiral of regret. He had believed he was helping her, offering her a chance at rehabilitation rather than ruin. But what he saw as mercy had unleashed chaos that tore through his family like wildfire. If he hadn't intervened, if he had simply allowed the law to take its course, Luna would have never been free to reach Will, to poison the innocence that Bill had sworn to protect. Now his son's life had been upended, his confidence shattered by betrayal and confusion. The revelation that Luna was pregnant had struck Bill with the force of a physical blow. He could still see the shock on Will's face, the way his hands trembled, the disbelief written across his young features. Will had always been his pride, intelligent, kind, and deeply moral, the best parts of both his parents distilled into one fragile, hopeful being. And now, because of Bill's own misguided leniency, Will was living inside a nightmare of public scrutiny, humiliation, and emotional ruin. Every headline that whispered about Luna's scandal felt like a knife twisting deeper into Bill's conscience. He told himself that he had acted out of compassion, that everyone deserved a second chance, but deep down, he knew the truth. It hadn't been compassion that guided him. It was arrogance. He thought he could control the outcome, that his influence could bend fate to his will. But fate was laughing now, cruel and unyielding. As he swirled the amber liquid in his glass, he caught sight of a familiar figure entering Il Giardino, Taylor Hayes. The sight of her startled him. She walked with the kind of grace that only years of struggle could produce, soft, hesitant, yet grounded. Her presence in the restaurant, however, was unexpected, even awkward. She paused briefly at the entrance, adjusting her coat, her eyes scanning the room with a blend of caution and quiet curiosity. When her gaze briefly met his, Bill looked away, uncertain whether to greet her or stay hidden behind his remorse. Taylor had her own reasons for being there. The past few months had been a blur of professional pressure and emotional exhaustion. Her therapy sessions were filled with people trying to mend the pieces of their lives, yet her own felt increasingly fractured. Il Giardino, once merely a familiar spot, had become a place she avoided after the chaos involving Deacon and Sheila. But today something drew her back, perhaps nostalgia, perhaps the quiet hope that the air had finally cleared of tension. And yet, fate had a cruel sense of humor. Because sitting only a few tables away was Sheila Sharp, her fiery red hair unmistakable, her laughter filling the air like the warning sound of an approaching storm. Deacon sat beside her, visibly tense, trying to balance affection and restraint. When Sheila spotted Taylor, her expression transformed instantly into delight, a radiant, almost childlike admiration that made Deacon shift uncomfortably in his seat. "Oh, look who it is," Sheila exclaimed, waving across the room before Taylor had the chance to retreat. Deacon followed her gaze, his eyes flickering with something complicated, recognition, discomfort, and perhaps something deeper. Taylor approached hesitantly, every step measured. The air grew heavy with awkward politeness as she greeted them, forcing a smile that felt rehearsed. Sheila began to speak with uncharacteristic enthusiasm, showering Taylor with gratitude for saving her marriage. Her words tumbled out too quickly, too brightly, a manic burst of praise that barely concealed insecurity. "You changed my life," she said, voice trembling with intensity. "You made me see Deacon in a whole new light. You're the reason we're still together." Taylor tried to respond with professionalism, but she could feel the tension simmering beneath Sheila's flattery. There was admiration, yes, but also obsession. Sheila's eyes glimmered with the dangerous devotion of someone who saw Taylor not as a doctor, but as a redeemer, a symbol of absolution she could never truly have. Deacon, watching the exchange, sensed it too. His jaw tightened, his hand brushing against the table as if bracing himself for impact. The scene unfolded like a quiet performance, each word a blade wrapped in civility. For Taylor, it was unbearable. The memory of what she and Deacon had shared, the secret understanding that once tied them, pressed against her chest like an unspoken confession. And now here they were, pretending everything was fine, pretending that their connection hadn't left an invisible scar. She excused herself as soon as she could, leaving behind the faint trace of her perfume and a silence that clung to the air. Deacon followed her with his eyes, knowing that whatever peace he had found with Sheila was temporary, fragile as glass. Sheila, noticing his distraction, smiled faintly, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. She knew. And jealousy, in Sheila's world, was never a quiet thing. Meanwhile, across town, Will was standing on the balcony of the beach house, staring at the horizon. The waves crashed against the shore with rhythmic indifference, as if mocking the chaos inside his heart. He had loved Luna once, or at least believed he had. What he felt now was a mixture of pity and horror, the remnants of affection tangled with betrayal. The news of her pregnancy had spread fast, and though the tabloids were careful to omit names, everyone who mattered already knew. Electra Forrester had been his anchor through it all. She didn't judge him, didn't demand explanations. Her presence was steady, soothing, like the tide itself. She had been there in the darkest moments, helping him breathe through the shame, reminding him that his future didn't have to end with Luna's mistakes. Bill noticed this change in his son, the fragile sense of calm that returned whenever Electra was near. It gave him something he hadn't felt in weeks: hope. That night, Bill made a decision. He couldn't undo what had happened, but he could create something better, something redemptive. He invited Will and Electra to dinner, choosing his words carefully as he spoke about second chances, about love's ability to rebuild what pain had broken. His voice cracked when he admitted that he had been wrong about Luna, that mercy without accountability was cruelty in disguise. Will listened in silence, his eyes glistening under the soft light of the dining room. Then Bill proposed an idea, simple, almost symbolic. "Move into the beach house," he said quietly. "Make it yours. Make it a place where the past can't reach you." The offer stunned them both. It wasn't just a gift, it was an apology, a desperate attempt to restore what guilt had taken away. In the days that followed, preparations began. The beach house, once tainted by Luna's presence, was being transformed. Painters worked to brighten the walls, new furniture arrived, and the sound of the ocean became a promise instead of a reminder. Bill even hired a so-called energy healer, a spiritual consultant who specialized in cleansing toxic spaces. At first, it sounded absurd, even comical, but for Bill, it was more than ritual. It was penance. He needed to believe that the darkness could be washed away, that his son could start over. When Will and Electra arrived to see the finished house, the evening light spilled through the windows, casting the room in hues of gold and coral. Electra smiled softly, her hand brushing against Will's as they walked through the doorway. For the first time in months, Will felt something like peace, fragile, tentative, but real. Bill stood back, watching them, realizing that this was his redemption, not through grand gestures of power, but through the quiet act of letting go. Yet peace in this world never lasted long. Back at Il Giardino, Deacon could feel the fabric of his relationship with Sheila beginning to fray. The encounter with Taylor had stirred something inside him that he couldn't suppress. Sheila sensed it instantly. Her laughter became sharper, her affection more possessive. She began asking questions about Taylor, where she was, what she had said, why he looked at her that way. Deacon denied everything, but denial only fueled her paranoia. When Taylor returned home that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. She replayed the scene in her mind, Sheila's gushing praise, Deacon's haunted eyes, and felt a storm gathering just beyond her reach. She had tried to move on, to bury the connection she once had with Deacon under layers of professionalism and restraint. But the truth was that part of her still cared, not for the man he was, but for the man she believed he could be. That belief was dangerous. It had already cost her peace once before. The following week brought whispers of unease. Sheila received an anonymous message, a warning about people watching, about unfinished business. Deacon tried to dismiss it, but something about the tone chilled him. The message mentioned Taylor's name. Suddenly, Their carefully maintained facade began to crack. Old wounds reopened, and trust, fragile as glass, began to shatter. Meanwhile, at the beach house, Will and Electra were slowly finding their rhythm. The nights were quiet, filled with the sound of waves and the faint hum of laughter. Bill visited often, not to intrude, but to reassure himself that this fragile peace was real. Every visit reminded him of how close he had come to losing everything. He watched his son grow stronger, more grounded, and for a while, it was enough. But Los Angeles had a way of resurrecting ghosts. Luna's name reappeared in the headlines, not as a victim this time, but as a woman seeking redemption. She was writing a memoir, exposing her version of events, painting herself as misunderstood. Bill's fury reignited. He had tried to make peace, but now it felt like Luna was mocking him, turning his mercy into her weapon. When the news reached Will, he didn't speak for hours. Electra found him on the porch, staring out at the sea again. The sound of the waves had changed, or maybe it was just him. He whispered that he was afraid the world would never let him forget. Electra held his hand tighter, telling him that redemption was not about forgetting but about surviving. Back at Il Giardino, Taylor returned once more, this time deliberately. She needed clarity, closure. Sheila was there again, her energy unpredictable, her mood swinging between charm and menace. Deacon sat beside her, visibly conflicted. When Taylor approached, Sheila smiled too brightly, as if daring fate to repeat itself. She began talking about destiny, about how some people were meant to cross paths again and again until they learned their lesson. The words carried a hidden edge, a threat disguised as philosophy. Taylor listened, her heart pounding, realizing that Sheila wasn't simply being grateful, she was staking a claim, marking her territory not just over Deacon, but over the past itself. In that moment, Taylor understood what Bill had been learning all along. Some mistakes couldn't be undone, only survived. The irony was almost poetic. Bill, the man who built empires, had found humility through guilt. Taylor, the woman who healed others, was learning to live with her own scars. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Deacon and Sheila continued their dangerous dance, a mirror of every relationship in Los Angeles where love and destruction shared the same face. By the time November's waves grew colder and the light faded earlier each evening, Illinois Giardino stood as a quiet stage where all their fates continued to intertwine. Bill found himself walking past the restaurant one night, the air thick with memory. Inside, laughter drifted out, the laughter of people who hadn't yet learned what it meant to lose everything. He paused for a moment, then kept walking, the sound of the ocean echoing in his mind like a promise that every act of forgiveness carries its own shadow and that redemption, once found, must be guarded with silence. And so, beneath the shimmering lights of the city, each of them carried their secrets forward. Bill with his guilt, Taylor with her longing, Deacon with his divided heart, and Sheila with her dangerous certainty that no story ever truly ends.